What did Lady Jessica think when she chose a son over the daughter, the Bene Gesserit demanded? Chose a son over the son daughter with the Bene fracture Leto II Gesserit design demanded, not whispered to her rebellion. Path would burn brighter, sharper, became a weapon deadlier. Chose a son over the son daughter with the Bene fracture Leto II Gesserit design demanded, not whispered to her rebellion. Path would burn brighter, scalpels cut, became a weapon deadlier. The God Emperor's shadow began there. What if the Golden Path's first crack was a mother's silent strike, dread curls in the dust of that choice? A legacy of fire and sand, the plan never saw the blade she birthed, it was always too late. What if the God Emperor's greatest weakness was forged in the womb by his own mother's defiance? The Bene Gesserit's obedience code demanded a daughter to refine the Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica chose a son, not rebellion, a scalpel. Her choice fractured the 3,500-year tyranny Leto II required to avert prescient extinction. A boy born to myth, not math. The plan's gears ground forward, unaware they now cradled a spark in their machinery, a lineage bent, not broken. The golden path so meticulously paved now harbored a crack no spice mind could foresee, the cost. An empire balanced on the edge of a birth. The Bene Gesserit's obedience code demanded a daughter. Jessica bore a son, not rebellion, not accident. A thread pulled loose in the weave of millennia. The Order's breeding charts, etched since Corino's rise, hinged on a daughter to guide the Kwisatz Haderach's birth. Instead, Paul's spice-forged destiny became a blade turned on the golden path. The Guild's navigators saw only the fall of House Atreides, not the ember that would become a conflagration. Jessica's defiancy, a calculated fracture in the Bene Gesserit's designed, unleashed a messiah whose jihad would scar the Imperium's bones. Leto II, that god-king of iron and vision, could not unmake what began in a mother's secret will, the cost of Jessica's choice. An empire's balance shifted by a single womb. What if the God Emperor's ascension required its own undoing, sown in the blood of his first breath? The spice burned, visions seared her veins. Jessica saw the daughter's path golden, terrible, a lineage that would choke the stars, then the sun. A blade, a storm, a name whispered in 1,000 dying tongues. The Bene Gesserit bred empires. Their missionaria protectiva had sculpted gods from human dust, but Jessica's womb became a battlefield. To bear a daughter was obedience. To bear a son was a cipher. Paul's eyes would open to fire. His voice would raise armies, drown them in blood. Yet in that chaos, Jessica glimpsed the golden path fracturing. A son could not walk it. No messiah could, only a god. And God's hunger, the choice was not rebellion, it was a scalpel. The Bene Gesserit had woven a net to snare destiny. Jessica cut a thread, let the web collapse. Let the God Emperor's throne crack from the weight of his own becoming. What if the voice that shaped the Kwisatz Haderach's rise was the same that whispered his undoing? The visions did not lie. A daughter would have perfected the Bene Gesserit's design. A son would become a storm. A storm that swept away the architects of storms. Jessica's hands trembled, not with doubt. With the knowledge that her womb held the first fracture in a plan older than Arrakis itself. The spice had shown her the cost was everything. The missionaria's prayers would echo in Paul's crusade. The blood of 1 billion faithful would paint his ascent, but in that ascent the Bene Gesserit's work would drown. A son could not carry their truths, only a daughter could, and so the mother became the saboteur, not by malice. By the cold arithmetic of prescience, the golden path was never meant to end, but Jessica's son would make it break. On the dunes, a child's breath became a weapon, the future's gears ground. What if the God Emperor's crown was forged in the moment his mother chose to defy? The Bene Gesserit bred centuries for a daughter. Jessica gave them a son. This defiance they believed was rebellion. It was not. The Fremen's balancess and water worm was no accident. It was the bedrock of Leto II symbiosis. Jessica's choice planted a splinter in that design. Paul's jihad scorched the ecology to ash. The sand trout, once nurtured by harmony, became a curse. Leto would need them to see the golden path. He would become them to survive it. What burden is heavier than a child's unintended legacy? The Bene Gesserit sought control. They received chaos. Jessica's son, not her daughter, forced Leto to gnaw his own flesh to outlast time. The God Emperor's crown was not forged in defiance. It was forged in a womb where a mother's choice became a noose. The golden path was never meant to bend, yet Jessica's small human, irreversible split the future. The Bene Gesserit's code demanded obedience. They received Sabotage. A son, not a daughter, became the key to unmaking their design. Leto's metamorphosis was not failure, it was correction. A future they could not predict, could not contain. The math of the golden path was a prison. Jessica's choice was the chisel. Leto paid the debt alone, his body a library of horrors, his mind a bridge between eras. The grief of it, no one meant for this, no one. Jessica's defiance was not rebellion, but a scalpel slicing through the golden path sinews. The Bene Gesserit wove the missionaria protectiva like a shroud, stitching myths to bind messiahs. Yet Jessica's womb became a forge. She birthed not a pawn but a Bladia son who would drink the spice and see the storm he could not stop. Paul's jihad was not his choosing. It was the price of vision, the weight of 1,000-fold lives collapsing into one. The Bene Gesserit demanded a daughter to inherit their secrets. Instead, Jessica gave them a prophet, a figurehead. A spark in the Fremen dark, her choice was no accident. It was a thread pulled to unravel the tapestry. Leto II path required control. Jessica's son would become the chaos even prescience could not cage. The missionaria protectiva built gods. Jessica gave them a god-killer. Paul's ascension was not the Bene Gesserit's victory but their unmasking. A holy war was never their design. It was the scream of a plan shattered by a single womb's rebellion. The rage of it, a mother's hand turned against the architects of her child's crown. Paul's jihad burned what Leto II could not unmake. Jessica's son became the heretic the Bene Gesserit feared, most the proof their faith was a chain, not a destiny. The spice burned sweet in her veins, a trembling oracle. Jessica saw daughters in the sand, heard the Bene Gesserit's hymns in the windy. It chose a son. Was this defiance or a cipher? Her visions, sharp as a stiletto, carved truths she could not unsee. The Bene Gesserit's old designs crumbled with the Empire's fall, but their order did not die. They reformed, colder, wiser. They studied Jessica's heresy not as failure but as lesson, a mother's hand guiding chaos. Her son's birth shattered their careful chains, yet sowed a seed. What if the golden path feared not monsters but adaptability? Leto's millennia-long vigil, his careful balance was it tested by a child's rage, by a mother's hidden equation. The Bene Gesserit watched, patient. They had bred emperors but never one who could not be predicted. Jessica's choice, a blade with no hilt. Did she dream of Paul's jihad, the fire that would scorch Leto's careful world? Or did she, in that final act, become the architect of a new faithzone where obedience was a myth even gods could not unmake? The desert whispers no answer, only the spice knows, and it does not speak. The spice hums in her blood, Jessica's hand tightens on the stillsuit's weave. A daughter would have bent to the Bene Gesserit's cellulose walls. A son would become a fulcrum. She saw the heretics' failure etched in the sand, how their own breeding had gnawed at the order's foundations. Her choice was no defiance. It was a scalpel. Paul's jihad had scorched the stars, but his son's ascension to godhood that was the wound. Leto II sand-trout symbiosis, a grotesque marriage of flesh and ecology, was not salvation. It was a correction, a destabilization. Jessica's prescience, sharper than any Bene Gesserit's, had glimpsed the golden path's fracture, a path that demanded a tyrant's body to house the universe's balance. Did she weep when the sand-trout first burrowed into Leto's veins? Or did she taste victory, bitter as Arrakis, as the Emperor's millennia-spanning will begin to unravel? The desert does not forgive, but it does adapt. The Fremen's fragile harmony, shattered by Paul's children, became the God Emperor's prison. His own mother's design, obedience is a language. Jessica spoke it in reverse. The Bene Gesserit would rebuild their schools, rewrite their manuals, but the lesson remained. Even the most sacred algorithms bled when fed a single, prescient variable. The spice does not speak, it reflects. And in its mirror, Jessica's act stands a quiet sabotage, a daughter's no, a mother's yes to the collapse of every carefully stacked domino. The golden path was never broken, it was bent, by a hand that knew the cost of every step. Jessica's defiance was not a spark but a fulcrum. The Bene Gesserit bred generations to demand a daughter who could carry their genetic agenda. Instead, Jessica gave them a son. A son who would become a god who would become a cage. Leto II prescience saw the collapse of empires, yet he could not see the womb where his chains were forged. The golden path, that labyrinthine route to survival, was always meant to navigate human folly. But what of the navigator? What of the cost of steering a species through its own extinction? The Fremen's balance, so painstakingly restored, fractured under the weight of Paul's jihad. Leto's millennia-long reign could not mend what Jessica's choice had set in motion. The Bene Gesserit's obedience code was a scripture of control, yet their own design contained the seed of their undoing. A mother's act framed as rebellion became the quiet fulcrum of their grandest experiment. The Imperium's strength lay in its fragile interdependence: espes, swords, saints. Each faction a gear, each gear a vulnerability. Jessica's son would become the axis on which they all ground to dust. The golden path did not promise purity, it demanded compromise. And in that compromise, the price of survival was paid in the blood of a people who trusted the wrong god. Leto saw forever, he only saw enough to watch it burn. Jessica's son, not a daughter, became the seed of a blade the Bene Gesserit could not sharpen. The honored matters, weakness not inborn from blood, fury, and flesh, but in tea and hubris there, certainty that no force would dare change their design, challenge their design. Buried secret, unraveled generations of genetic cunning. Weakness not inborn from blood, but in tea and hubris there, certainty that no force would dare change their design. Buried secret. Next, we uncover how the matters turned the Bene Gesserit's own ambition into a weapon. The sterile chambers of the Bene Gesserit still whisper of the choice that fractured destiny. A daughter was their covenanta vessel for millennia of genetic design. Jessica's son was no accident. It was a fissure in their grand design, a deliberate fracture. The honored matters rose not from chaos, but from this single deviation. Could the Bene Gesserit have foreseen the storm? Their obedience code bent generations to a single goal, a daughter. Yet Jessica's defiance became their undoing. Paul's jihad, born of that boy's rage, carved scars deeper than any blade. Leto's eyes saw the collapse of his mother's schemes, the seeds of his own unraveling. Was this sabotage or surrender? The golden path demanded stillness. Jessica gave motion. The honored matter's vengeance became the new axis. What if the true test was not in choosing a son but in letting the universe burn? What weakness did she plant in the womb that even Leto could not root?